The unexpected war. Malik was just an ordinary 16-year-old boy, living a simple life in a quiet neighborhood. It was a normal Saturday afternoon when his world changed forever. He had been spending the day with his friends, playing basketball in the park near his house. They had just finished a game when Malik saw something that made his heart stop. An elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, were sitting on a bench nearby. A group of young teenagers started making fun of them, laughing loudly at their age and the way they looked. Malik's heart sank as he watched the couple try to ignore the cruel words, but it was clear that they were embarrassed. The teenagers were relentless, calling them names and making rude gestures. Malik couldn't stand it any longer. He was known for being calm and respectful, but this was different. This was wrong. He couldn't just walk away and pretend he hadn't seen it. Without thinking, Malik stepped forward, his voice firm as he said, "Hey, stop that right now." The group of teenagers turned to him, surprised by his sudden appearance. Malik didn't back down. He looked at them one by one, his gaze steady. "What's wrong with you? Leave them alone." The teenagers laughed, clearly not taking him seriously. One of them, a tall boy with a sneer on his face, stepped forward. "And what are you going to do about it, little man?" he taunted. Malik felt his heart racing, but he wasn't afraid. He was used to standing up for what was right. "I'll make sure you don't hurt them anymore. Now leave them alone," he said, his voice filled with determination. The bully took a step forward, but before anything could happen, Malik stood tall and placed himself between the group and the elderly couple. His stance was strong, his eyes unwavering. "I won't let you pick on them," he said quietly. There was a moment of silence, the tension hanging in the air. Then, to Malik's surprise, the bully backed down. The other teenagers murmured among themselves, clearly unsure of what to do. Slowly, they turned and walked away, muttering insults under their breath. The elderly couple, though clearly shaken, looked up at Malik with grateful eyes. "Thank you, young man," Mrs. Johnson said softly, her voice shaky. "You didn't have to do that." Malik smiled, feeling a sense of pride. It was nothing, he said, though deep down, he knew it was more than just a small act of kindness. He had done what was right, and that made all the difference. As the elderly couple left the park, Malik stood there for a moment, thinking about what had just happened. He didn't know it yet, but this small act of bravery would set off a chain of events that would change his life forever. The next day, as Malik was sitting in his room, doing homework, he heard a knock on the door. He stood up, curious, and opened it. Standing outside was a man in a dark suit, his face serious. "Are you Malik?" the man asked, his voice low. "Yeah, that's me," Malik replied, his curiosity growing. The man nodded. "I'm Mr. Edwards. I work for Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. We need to talk." Malik's mind raced as he tried to understand what was happening. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson," he repeated, the elderly couple he had helped the day before. "Yes," Mr. Edwards replied. "We've been watching you. Your actions yesterday caught the attention of some very powerful people. You've proven yourself to be someone who stands up for what's right. We need your help." Malik stood there, stunned. He had done something good, something he thought was just a small act of kindness. But now, it seemed that his actions had opened a door to something much bigger than he could ever imagine. "What kind of help?" Malik asked, his voice filled with confusion. "There are people who want to hurt the Johnsons," Mr. Edwards explained. "They've been targeted by dangerous individuals who will stop at nothing to take everything they have. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson need someone they can trust, someone who isn't afraid to fight for what's right." Malik's head was spinning. He had never imagined anything like this. He had simply stepped in to stop a group of bullies. Now he was being asked to become part of something much bigger, something that could put him in danger. "I don't know if I'm the right person for this," Malik said, his voice hesitant. He wasn't sure if he was ready for the kind of responsibility Mr. Edwards was asking of him. "You are," Mr. Edwards said, his voice firm. "You've already shown what kind of person you are. You have the courage to stand up for others. That's why we believe you can help us." The words hit Malik like a wave. Courage. That was what had made him step forward in the park. But now, it seemed that the courage he had shown would be tested in ways he had never imagined. Malik was faced with a choice. He could go back to his normal life, stay safe, and forget about what had happened, or he could step into a world he didn't understand, a world filled with danger, where his actions could have serious consequences. The man in the suit waited for his answer. Malik took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision on his shoulders. "I'll help," he said, his voice steady. Mr. Edwards gave him a nod of approval. "Good. Welcome to the fight." With that, Malik stepped into a new world, one filled with dangers, secrets, and a responsibility he had never asked for. But as he thought back to the elderly couple and the way they had thanked him, he knew he had made the right choice. This was just the beginning of an unexpected war. The mysterious stranger. The next day, Malik couldn't shake the strange feeling that something big was happening, something he wasn't quite prepared for. After Mr. Edwards had left, he spent hours thinking about what the man had said. Who were these people Mr. Edwards worked for? Why was the elderly couple, the Johnsons, in danger? And why had his small act of kindness led him into something so serious? Malik's phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a text from his best friend, Jake. "Yo, Malik, you good? You seemed off yesterday after that whole thing with the Johnsons. Everything cool?" Malik stared at the message for a moment. He wanted to tell Jake everything, but something held him back. He didn't understand what was going on, and he didn't want to drag his friend into something dangerous. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a little tired. I'll tell you more later." He sent the message, hoping it was enough to avoid any questions. But deep down, Malik knew there was no way he could just forget about what had happened. He had already agreed to help Mr. Edwards, but he still had no idea what he was really getting himself into. The entire situation felt like a mystery, one that only seemed to get more complicated the longer he thought about it. Later that afternoon, as Malik walked home from school, he noticed something unusual. A black SUV was parked across the street from his house. It looked like any other car at first, but the tinted windows and the way it seemed to blend into the shadows made Malik feel uneasy. It didn't look like a car that belonged in his neighborhood. He felt his stomach tighten. Just coincidence, Malik muttered to himself, trying to calm his nerves. But as he walked past the car, he saw the figure inside, watching him through the window. It was hard to make out details, but the figure seemed tall and imposing. Malik's heart skipped a beat. He quickened his pace, wanting to get home and away from the strange presence. The figure in the SUV remained motionless, but Malik couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching his every move. Once inside his house, Malik locked the door behind him and leaned against it, trying to steady his breathing. He tried to focus on his homework, but the unsettling feeling lingered. Was this part of the danger Mr. Edwards had warned him about? That evening, as Malik was finishing dinner with his family, the doorbell rang. His mom, a quiet woman with a kind smile, stood up to answer it. "Who's that?" Malik asked, his voice tight. "Probably a neighbor or something," his mom replied, opening the door. But when she looked out, her face changed. Malik could see the confusion in her eyes as she spoke. "Can I help you?" she asked politely. A tall man in a dark suit stood on the doorstep, holding a briefcase. He looked serious, his eyes scanning the neighborhood as if searching for something or someone. "I'm sorry to bother you," the man said in a low, calm voice, "but I need to speak with Malik." Malik's heart skipped a beat. The man's tone was polite, but there was something off about him. He couldn't explain it, but it sent a chill down his spine. "Mom, it's okay," Malik said, stepping forward. He looked at the man carefully. The stranger didn't seem dangerous at first, but there was something about him that felt wrong. The man smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Good to meet you, Malik. I have a few things to discuss with you. May I come in?" Before Malik could respond, his mother stepped back. "I'm afraid Malik is busy right now," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "We're just having dinner. Maybe you could come back later." But the man didn't budge. His eyes stayed fixed on Malik, and Malik could feel the weight of his gaze. It was as if the man knew something important about him. "I think it's important we talk now, Malik," the man said, his voice growing firmer. "It's about the Johnsons and the choices you've made." Malik's blood ran cold. How did this man know about the Johnsons? How did he know about what had happened the day before? "I don't know what you're talking about," Malik said, trying to stay calm. But inside, his mind was racing. The stranger's words felt like a warning. The man's expression didn't change. "I think you do. You've already made one choice, and now you have another choice to make." The tension in the air was thick. Malik could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He knew something was about to change. He could feel it. This man was connected to the danger that Mr. Edwards had warned him about, but Malik didn't know how or why. The man continued, "You've got two paths, Malik. The path of safety and ignorance, or the path of truth. But be careful. Once you choose, there's no going back." Before Malik could respond, the man turned and walked away, leaving Malik standing there, more confused than ever. "Who was that?" Malik's mother asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know," Malik whispered, his mind racing. "But I think I'm in deeper than I thought." As the man disappeared into the distance, Malik realized one thing. This wasn't just about helping the Johnsons anymore. There was something bigger, something darker at play. And Malik had just stepped into the middle of it, unraveling the truth. The next few days were a blur for Malik. He couldn't get the stranger's words out of his head. "Once you choose, there's no going back." The ominous warning had lingered in his mind, and no matter how hard he tried to push it away, it wouldn't let him go. What was it all about? Who was this man? And what was the real danger that loomed over the Johnsons, and by extension, over him? It was Friday afternoon when Malik decided he could no longer ignore it. He couldn't live in fear, not knowing what he was up against. He had to find out more. So after school, he made a plan. "I'm going to visit the Johnsons," he told his mom as he grabbed his jacket. His voice was firm, though inside, his nerves were on edge. "You sure, Malik?" she asked, concern written across her face. "After everything that happened, I think it's better if you stay home for a while." "I'll be fine, Mom," Malik reassured her, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "I just need to know what's going on. I promise I'll be careful." With a heavy sigh, his mom gave him a long look before nodding. "All right, just be back before it gets dark." Malik nodded, promising he would. But deep down, he knew he wasn't just going to visit the Johnsons. He had to understand the bigger picture, why the man in the suit had shown up at his house, and why he felt so strongly about Malik's involvement in all of this. As he walked to the Johnsons' house, Malik's mind raced with questions. The neighborhood was quiet, the streets empty, but the black SUV was still parked near his house. It had been there for days, and Malik couldn't stop looking at it. It felt like a constant reminder that he wasn't just a teenager trying to help an elderly couple anymore. No, something far bigger was happening, and Malik had become a part of it without fully understanding why. When he arrived at the Johnsons' house, Mrs. Johnson greeted him warmly. "Malik, thank you so much for what you did for us," she said with a smile, but there was an underlying tension in her voice. "We're not used to people standing up for us like that." Malik smiled back, though it didn't feel quite right. "I just did what was right." She motioned for him to come inside. "Come in, dear. I have something I want to show you." Inside, the house was just as cozy as it had always been, but Malik noticed something had changed. Mrs. Johnson seemed nervous, glancing out the window every few seconds, as if expecting someone or something. She led him into the living room and sat him down. "Malik," she began, her voice quiet. "I don't know how to say this, but you need to know the truth about what's been happening." Malik leaned forward, his heart beating faster. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Johnson hesitated for a moment, then reached into her drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. She handed it to Malik, and he opened it slowly, revealing photographs, documents, and news clippings. He stared at the first image, a black and white photo of a group of people standing around a large, imposing building. The name at the top of the article read, "The Vanguard Group, a new power in town." "What is this?" Malik asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Those people in the picture," Mrs. Johnson said, her voice trembling, "are connected to the people who are after us. They're dangerous, Malik. They've been watching us. And they've been watching you too." Malik felt his stomach drop. "Watching me?" Mrs. Johnson nodded. "They know what you did. They're the reason the man in the suit came to your house. They know you're involved now, and they'll stop at nothing to get what they want." Malik looked at the documents in his hands. It was like a puzzle with too many pieces missing. Who were these people, and why were they after the Johnsons? Why did Malik have to be involved in this? "I don't understand," Malik said, shaking his head. "What do they want from us?" "From me?" Mrs. Johnson sighed. "I don't know all the details, but the Vanguard Group is powerful. They have money, influence, and connections. They've been buying up land, businesses, and people, gathering control over everything in this town. And they'll stop at nothing to make sure no one stands in their way." Malik was silent for a moment, trying to process the information. The weight of the situation was sinking in. This wasn't just about a random stranger or a misunderstanding. The Vanguard Group was dangerous, and it was all connected to the Johnsons, and somehow to him. "Why are they after you?" Malik asked, finally finding his voice again. "They're after the land we own," Mrs. Johnson said, her voice filled with regret. "But it's not just about the land. They want to control everything, and we're in their way." Malik's mind was racing. The man in the suit, the black SUV, everything was starting to make sense, but it was worse than he could have imagined. "I can't just sit here," Malik said suddenly, standing up. "I have to do something." Mrs. Johnson looked at him, concern in her eyes. "Be careful, Malik. The more you dig into this, the more dangerous it gets. You've already seen what they can do." Malik didn't respond immediately. He was still processing everything, but one thing was clear. He couldn't turn back now. This was bigger than him, and bigger than the Johnsons. There was a force at work here, one that wasn't going to stop until it had everything under control. As Malik walked out of the Johnsons' house, the weight of the world seemed to settle on his shoulders. But he wasn't afraid. No, he was determined. Whoever these people were, whatever they wanted, Malik was going to make sure they didn't get away with it. And if he had to fight for it, he would. Because in that moment, Malik knew one thing. He had to protect what was right, no matter the cost. The visitor. The next morning, Malik woke up with a feeling of unease that wouldn't go away. After the shocking truth Mrs. Johnson had revealed to him the night before, the weight of the situation hung heavily on his shoulders. The Vanguard Group, whoever they were, was far more dangerous than he had imagined. They had the power to control entire communities, and now they had their eyes set on him. As he walked to school, Malik couldn't shake the image of the black SUV parked near his house, a constant reminder that someone, somewhere, was watching. He tried to push it out of his mind, but the thought kept creeping back in. He was being drawn into something far larger than he had expected, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. By the time the school bell rang, signaling the start of classes, Malik had already made up his mind. He wasn't going to sit idly by. He had to find out everything he could about the Vanguard Group. There was no turning back now. But for now, he needed to focus. He couldn't let his growing anxiety interfere with his schoolwork. The day dragged on, but Malik's mind was elsewhere. Every time a classmate glanced his way, he felt like they knew something was wrong. His usual routine of hanging out with his friends after school felt strange. He couldn't shake the feeling that the world was watching him. When the final bell rang and school was over, Malik quickly made his way home. His mind was racing. He had to warn the Johnsons, but he needed to get some answers first. The black SUV had to be connected to the Vanguard group. He had to confront whoever was behind it, and he knew he couldn't do it alone. He walked through the door of his house, his eyes scanning the street outside, looking for any signs of danger. Everything seemed normal, but that didn't ease the knot in his stomach. He dropped his backpack on the couch and went straight to his room, grabbing his phone. He needed to reach out to someone who could help him. But as he pulled up his contacts, his phone buzzed in his hand. A message popped up, one that sent a chill down his spine. "Malik, we need to talk. Meet me at the park at 5 p.m. A." Malik stared at the message for a long time. Who was A? And why did they want to meet him? It was strange, but the name seemed familiar. He didn't recognize the number, but something told him this wasn't just another random message. He took a deep breath and decided to go. He couldn't afford to ignore anything now. Something told him this meeting would bring him closer to the answers he desperately needed. As he walked to the park later that afternoon, Malik's nerves only grew stronger. The air was thick with anticipation. He scanned the surroundings, his eyes darting between the trees and the empty benches. The park was unusually quiet, and the sound of his footsteps echoed through the air. Then, just as the clock struck 5 p.m., he spotted a figure in the distance, standing beneath a streetlight. The person was dressed in a dark hoodie, their face obscured by the shadow of the hood. Malik's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the person who had contacted him. He approached cautiously, keeping his distance but moving forward with determination. The figure didn't move, waiting for him to come closer. Malik stopped a few feet away, his eyes locked on the stranger. "You Malik?" the figure asked, their voice low and steady. Malik nodded. "Who are you? And what do you want from me?" The stranger didn't answer immediately. Instead, they took a step closer, their face still hidden by the shadows. "I'm someone who knows what's really going on. Someone who knows what the Vanguard group wants, and what they're capable of." Malik's heart raced. He had been right. This was about the Vanguard group. But how did this person know so much? And why were they speaking to him now? "Why are you here?" Malik asked, his voice trembling slightly. "What do you want from me?" The stranger hesitated before answering. "I'm here to help you. You've already made a choice, Malik. You've stepped into something much bigger than you realize. But if you want to protect yourself and the Johnsons, you have to trust me." Malik frowned, confused. "Protect us? From what?" The stranger stepped forward, lowering their hood slightly. Malik's breath caught in his throat as he saw the person's face. It was a woman, her features sharp but kind, with eyes that seemed to hold a wealth of knowledge. "My name is Alex," she said, her voice calm but serious. "And I've been tracking the Vanguard group for years. They're dangerous, and they'll stop at nothing to get what they want. But I can help you fight back." Malik stood still, trying to process everything. "You've been tracking them for years, but why me? Why do they care about me?" Alex's expression grew darker. "Because you're more involved than you think, Malik. The Vanguard group has been watching you for a while. The way you stood up for the Johnsons, what you did wasn't just a random act of kindness. It was a sign that you could be an ally, and they won't let that go." Malik felt the blood drain from his face. The stranger's words hit him like a punch to the gut. "But I didn't do anything wrong," he said, his voice faltering. "I just wanted to help." Alex nodded. "I know. But to them, you've become a threat. And you're not the only one. They've been targeting others in the town too, using fear to get what they want. But there's a way out, if we act quickly. Malik's mind was racing. What do I have to do? Alex's eyes narrowed, a glint of determination in her gaze. You have to help me take them down. But first, we need to know what they're planning next. I can't do it alone, Malik. Are you in? Malik hesitated for a moment, the weight of the decision hanging in the air. This wasn't just a fight for the Johnsons anymore. It was a fight for his own safety, and for the safety of everyone around him. With a deep breath, he made up his mind. I'm in, Malik said, his voice steady. Alex nodded, a small smile on her lips. Good. Let's get to work. The plan unfolds. Malik's mind was spinning as he followed Alex through the empty streets. The weight of the situation was heavier now that he knew how deep he was involved with the Vanguard group. But despite the fear gnawing at him, something inside Malik felt a spark of determination. He wasn't going to let these people destroy everything he cared about, no matter how powerful they seemed. They arrived at a small, nondescript building on the edge of town. Alex led Malik to the back, where a rusty door creaked open, revealing the hidden basement. It wasn't much to look at, but to Malik, it felt like the beginning of something much bigger. The walls were lined with old maps, photographs, and documents scattered all over the place. This is where it all started, Alex said quietly, motioning for Malik to follow her inside. The Vanguard group has been making moves in this town for years, and no one's been able to stop them. Malik looked around, his eyes landing on a photograph of a familiar face. He squinted. That's Mr. Johnson, he said, pointing to the photo. Alex nodded grimly. Yes, he's been an ally for a long time. He's helped me gather information, but he's in danger now. They know about his involvement, and they'll do whatever it takes to shut him down. Malik's heart raced. What do we do about it? How do we stop them? Alex's face was determined. We need to find out what they're planning. They're not going to make their next move public. We have to get inside their operations, find their weaknesses, and expose them for who they really are. Malik's mind raced with questions. But how do we even get close to them? They're too powerful. They've already targeted me. Alex smiled slightly, though it didn't reach her eyes. That's where you come in, Malik. They already see you as a threat, so we can use that against them. We need to get them to think you're part of their team. Once we're in, we can gather the information we need. Malik felt the weight of Alex's words settle in. He wasn't sure how he felt about pretending to work with the Vanguard group, but the thought of taking them down made it easier to push his doubts aside. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who was suffering under their control. I'm ready, Malik said, his voice filled with resolve. Alex handed Malik a stack of files. We'll start by tracking their communications. They're careful, but they've made mistakes. We've been watching, waiting for an opening. Now we have to act fast. As they went over the documents, Malik couldn't help but feel the magnitude of the task ahead. It wasn't just about uncovering the Vanguard group's secrets. It was about stopping them before they could hurt anyone else. You won't be alone in this, Alex reassured him as she pointed to a map on the wall. I have a few trusted people who will help, but we have to be smart. One wrong move, and everything could fall apart. Malik nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. His mind flashed back to the Johnsons, the way they had stood together in the face of adversity. It was the same with Alex now. They were a team, and they had to trust each other if they were going to succeed. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the building. Malik froze. Alex's expression hardened, and she motioned for him to be quiet. She reached for her phone and sent a quick message. Stay low, she whispered. They're here. Malik's heart pounded in his chest. He tried to steady his breath, his senses heightened. The last thing he wanted was to be discovered before they were ready. He couldn't let all of this be for nothing. They waited in tense silence as the footsteps grew louder. Then the door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. It wasn't a member of the Vanguard group, but someone else, someone Alex clearly trusted. The man looked at them with a mix of curiosity and wariness. "Alex, Malik," he said, his voice gruff but calm. "The situation's getting worse. We've got reports of a new shipment coming in tonight. It's big, bigger than anything we've seen before." Alex's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean by big?" The man took a deep breath, clearly troubled. "Weapons. They're bringing in a lot of them. Enough to control the whole town. We've got to move fast. If we don't act now, it could be too late." Malik's blood ran cold. The Vanguard group wasn't just about power anymore. They were willing to go as far as to use force to get what they wanted. Malik had already seen how far they were willing to push, and the idea of them gaining control over the town was terrifying. "We can't let that happen," Malik said, his voice steady despite the rising fear inside him. Alex nodded. "We won't. We'll need everyone we've got to take them down. But we have to be smart. We can't let them know we're onto them yet." The man gave a short nod. "I'll start gathering people. You two keep digging. We need all the information we can get." As the man left to rally their allies, Alex turned to Malik, her eyes sharp and focused. "This is it, Malik. We're going to hit them where it hurts. But we have to be careful. If we do this right, we can take them down." Malik felt a fire stir inside him. He had no idea what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't backing down now. The fight for his town, for the Johnsons, and for everyone who had been silenced by the Vanguard group was just beginning. And he was ready. The final push. The tension in the air was palpable as Malik and Alex prepared for their final push against the Vanguard group. The stakes were higher now than ever before. The group's weapons shipment was expected to arrive that night, and if they didn't act soon, it would be too late to stop them. Malik couldn't help but feel the weight of what was coming. The quiet nights of watching and waiting had come to an end. Tonight, everything would change. Alex paced back and forth in the small room, her mind racing through the plan they'd spent days developing. She was calm on the outside, but Malik could see the worry in her eyes. She was trying to hold it together. But even she knew that this operation had a lot of risks. There was no going back now. "We have to hit them hard and fast," Alex said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "Once we have the shipment, we'll have leverage. But we need to get to the warehouse before they offload anything. If they get a chance to secure the weapons, we'll be in trouble." Malik nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the faint sound of cars in the distance, the Vanguard's movement, getting closer with every passing second. It was time to make their move. "Where do we start?" Malik asked, his voice steady despite the chaos inside his mind. Alex glanced at the map on the wall, pointing to a location on the outskirts of town. "That's where they're bringing the shipment in. It's a secluded warehouse, and it's heavily guarded. We got a small window to get in, grab what we need, and get out. We'll have to split up once we're inside, cause distractions, disable their security, and grab the intel." Malik took a deep breath. This was the moment he had been waiting for. No more running. No more hiding. He was ready to do whatever it took to stop the Vanguard group and protect the people he cared about. As the group of allies they had gathered prepared for the mission, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The quiet night felt too still, too controlled. The feeling of being watched crept over him, but he brushed it aside. He couldn't afford to let doubt take over now. "Stay sharp," Alex said as she placed a hand on Malik's shoulder. "We'll make it through this. Together." Malik gave her a firm nod. They had come this far, and there was no turning back. With a final glance at their small team, they set off, their footsteps echoing through the streets as they made their way toward the warehouse. The closer they got, the more the tension built. Every corner they turned, every shadow they passed, felt like it could hide a danger they couldn't predict. But Malik kept his focus. They couldn't afford to fail now. As they reached the warehouse, Malik's heart raced. The place was quiet, too quiet. It didn't look like the Vanguard group was expecting them, not yet anyway. But Malik's instincts told him that something wasn't right. There was no sign of the guards, no signs of movement inside. He glanced over at Alex, who seemed just as alert. "Something's wrong," Malik muttered under his breath. Alex held up a hand, signaling the group to stop. Her eyes scanned the area, her sharp gaze missing nothing. "They're waiting for us. They knew we'd come." Malik's stomach dropped. How could they have known? They had kept everything so secret. There was no way the Vanguard could have anticipated their every move unless there was a mole in their group. "We're walking into a trap," Alex whispered, her voice low but full of intensity. Malik's mind raced. Who could have betrayed them? He didn't have time to process it all. The plan had to go on. "What do we do?" Alex's face hardened. "We go in anyway. We're committed. But we need to be quick, and we need to be silent. We don't have time for a fight." With that, they slipped inside the warehouse, the sounds of their footsteps muffled by the thick walls. Malik's pulse thudded in his ears as he followed Alex through the dark corridors. They moved quickly, staying low and avoiding any possible confrontation. As they approached the back room, Malik could hear voices, low and hushed. He could barely make out the words, but he knew they were close. The Vanguard group was just on the other side of the door, waiting for something, or someone. Suddenly, the door creaked open. Malik froze, his breath caught in his throat. But it wasn't the Vanguard they had expected. It was someone else, someone Malik knew all too well. "Malik," a voice said coolly from the shadows. "I knew you'd be here." Malik's heart stopped in his chest as the figure stepped into the light. It was his old friend, James, the same person who had once helped him back when things were simpler. But now, James was standing with the Vanguard group. "James, what are you doing?" Malik's voice trembled with a mix of disbelief and anger. James smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile Malik remembered. It was cold, calculating. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out. I've been working with them for a while now, and I've been watching you." Malik's world tilted. The betrayal was real. His mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what had just happened. James had been the mole all along. He had helped them plan their downfall, fed information to the Vanguard group, and all along Malik had trusted him. "Why?" Malik asked, his voice raw with emotion. James shrugged, a cruel smirk crossing his face. "Because the Vanguard group offers power, Malik. And you, well, you were always just a pawn. I've learned it the hard way." Alex stepped forward, her eyes flashing with fury. "You betrayed us, James. You betrayed Malik." James didn't flinch. "It's too late now. You're trapped." Malik's stomach churned with the realization. This was it. The betrayal had come full circle. There was no easy way out, and there was no going back. The final battle had begun. The final betrayal. The tension in the warehouse was thick, like a heavy blanket smothering every breath Malik tried to take. The figure standing before him, James, had once been a trusted friend. Now he was the face of betrayal, and every word that came out of his mouth felt like a slap to Malik's face. Alex's stance was defensive, her eyes sharp as she watched James carefully. She was as stunned as Malik, but there was no time to waste on disbelief. They had to think fast. "You don't get it, James," Malik said, his voice steady despite the betrayal burning in his chest. "You're just a pawn, too. You're not one of them." James chuckled, a low, mocking sound that seemed to echo off the cold warehouse walls. "Oh, but I am, Malik. I always was. You never understood the bigger picture. I've worked my way up, and now I'm in control." The words stung, each one hitting harder than the last. Malik's mind raced. James wasn't just playing a game. He had sold out to the highest bidder, and that bidder was the Vanguard group. They were dangerous, ruthless, and they were about to turn everything upside down. "I trusted you, James," Malik said, the words thick with pain. "I never thought you'd throw everything away for power." James sneered. You were always too soft, Malik. You think the world can be saved by doing what's right. Well, I learned the hard way that it's power that moves things, and I plan to be on top when it all falls apart. Alex stepped forward, her voice sharp with anger. We're not backing down, James. No matter how much you've sold out, we'll stop the Vanguard, and we'll stop you. James shrugged, unfazed. You don't have the numbers, Alex. You never did. The Vanguard is unstoppable now. Malik could feel his pulse quicken. It wasn't just a fight anymore. It was personal. James wasn't just the mole. He had become a dangerous enemy. Malik's fists clenched at his sides as the weight of everything they had fought for hung in the balance. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Heavy, purposeful. The Vanguard group was closing in. James's grin widened as he stepped back into the shadows, his eyes glinting with satisfaction. You think you're so clever, Malik said, his voice hard. But you're not. We've come too far to let you or your new masters win. James laughed, a low, mocking sound. You really think you can take down the Vanguard? You're out of your league, Malik, but you've got a front row seat to watch everything crumble. Malik knew they had no time to waste. The Vanguard was already moving in, and they had to act fast. Alex nodded at him, her face set in determination. We can't let them bring the weapons into play. We need to get out of here and stop that shipment, no matter what. The realization hit Malik like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about stopping the Vanguard anymore. It was about survival. If they didn't stop the weapons from reaching their final destination, the consequences would be catastrophic. I'm not leaving until I stop them, Malik said, his voice fierce. Alex moved swiftly, signaling to their small team to spread out. They couldn't take the whole Vanguard group head-on, but they could create chaos. If they could disrupt the shipment, they might still have a chance. The sound of metal doors sliding open echoed through the warehouse, and Malik's heart raced. This was it. There was no turning back now. With a final glance at James, who remained hidden in the shadows, Malik and Alex rushed toward the control room, where the shipment's details were stored. Their team was already in position, ready to cause a distraction and delay the Vanguard's plans. As they reached the control room door, Malik felt a surge of hope. This wasn't over. Not yet. The Vanguard might have thought they had won, but Malik wasn't about to give up. He wasn't about to let everything they'd worked for be destroyed. The door creaked open, and they found themselves face to face with a group of Vanguard guards. There was no time for hesitation. Alex moved first, taking out the closest guard with a swift punch to the throat. Malik followed her lead, disabling the next guard with a quick jab to his side. They moved with precision, working in perfect sync, and before long, the guards were subdued. Inside the control room, the monitors flickered to life, showing the route of the weapon shipment. Malik's eyes narrowed. They had to change the coordinates before it was too late. As he worked furiously at the console, Alex kept watch, her eyes scanning for any signs of movement. Suddenly, the door crashed open behind them, and James stood there, his expression cold and calculating. It's over, Malik, he said, his voice laced with venom. You were never meant to win. Malik didn't look up from the console. I'm not done yet, he muttered, hitting a series of keys to reroute the shipment. James moved closer, his footsteps deliberate and heavy. You can't stop it. No one can. But Malik wasn't listening to him. He had come too far to turn back now. With a final click, the system went dark, and the shipment was rerouted to a different location. They had done it. They had stopped the Vanguard group's weapons from reaching their destination. As Malik turned to face James, he knew the fight wasn't over, but this victory was sweet. They had one last chance to stop the Vanguard for good. James's face twisted in fury as he realized what had happened. You think you've won. This isn't over, Malik. I'll make sure of that. Malik stepped forward, his voice low but confident. It's over for you, James. It's over for all of you. With the weapons shipment stopped and the Vanguard's plans thwarted, Malik and his team had won a crucial battle. But the war was far from over. James might have been a traitor, but he wasn't the last threat they would face. As Malik looked out over the dimly lit warehouse, he knew they had just begun the fight of their lives. But Malik wasn't listening to him. He had come too far to turn back now. With a final click, the system went dark, and the shipment was rerouted to a different location. They had done it. They had stopped the Vanguard group's weapons from reaching their destination. As Malik turned to face James, he knew the fight wasn't over. But this victory was sweet. They had one last chance to stop the Vanguard for good. James's face twisted in fury as he realized what had happened. You think you've won. This isn't over, Malik. I'll make sure of that. Malik stepped forward, his voice low but confident. It's over for you, James. It's over for all of you. With the weapons shipment stopped and the Vanguard's plans thwarted, Malik and his team had won a crucial battle. But the war was far from over. James might have been a traitor, but he wasn't the last threat they would face. As Malik looked out over the dimly lit warehouse, he knew they had just begun the fight of their lives.